wrong button. Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator slash pilot Fragath, and today we're going to be reading more of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Volume 1, Dawn, by Yoshiki Tanaka, translated by Daniel Huddleston. The only real thing that we did last week was do the basic history lesson, explaining what the setting is all about. So we have a brief explanation of humanity growing and going into the stars, having a nice golden age of sorts, where they were ever striving and then sort of falling in on themselves a bit with a degree of decadence. And then the rise of a dictator, Rudolf von Goldenbaum, and his founding of the Imperial Empire, and all the horrible things that he wound up doing. Which, the rise of that empire for the last couple hundred years, and then its sort of steady decline. And we'll learn a bit more about the particulars of that decline later. Right now, we've just kind of got the bare bones of, it was a dynasty that lasted however long, or has lasted however long thus far, and it's not the same as it used to be. And there's this other organization of people who used to be trapped under the boot heels of the von Goldenbaum dynasty, who would call themselves the Free Planets Alliance, and are sticking to the democracy thing. And actually have successfully resisted up until now. They've taken some hits, but militarily they're both about even. At the moment. There's also this little place called the Pheasant Dominion, which is sort of playing both sides against the middle in order to stay alive. Kind of acting as a neutral ground, a space Switzerland, if you will. It is more than that, and we'll get to that later. That isn't spoilers. They wouldn't mention it if it wasn't important. That's basic writing. We've been introduced to two of our primaries, in Reinhard von Lohengramm and Wen-Li, who are on opposing sides of the conflict. Reinhard as part of the Imperial Empire, and Wen-Li as part of the Free Planets Alliance. We are setting up for clashes and drama. We've learned a bit about Wen-Li's feats. Reinhard, I think, has not much to recommend him other than being fairly clever and a royal by technicality. But not directly of the Goldenbaum dynasty. He's adjacent. So, with that, I figure we can get started on Chapter 2. Let me just flip ahead here. I thought I set aside what I was going to read, and I forgot. This happens. One is Chapter 3. Not terribly long. We can make that work. Okie dokie. Let me get a little water in me, and then we will rock and roll with one of the greatest space operas. Certainly one of the greatest space operas that Japan has produced in literary form in a hot minute. It's going to take a while to really get underway, but it does a pretty good job balancing drama with action. Mostly it is drama, though. All right, let's get rolling. Chapter 2, The Battle of Astarte. Part 1. Vice Admiral Pastor, commander of the Alliance Navy's Fourth Fleet, was flummoxed when he heard the report. Imperial warships closing rapidly. The entire display screen of Fleet Flagship Leonidas was being covered in points of light as they swarmed into being, their luminosity climbing by the moment as they swelled ever larger. It was a sight filled with menace. The hearts of all who saw it were set racing, and their mouths went dry. The Vice Admiral sat up straight in his command chair.
"What's going on here?"
he growled in a low voice.
"What do the Imperials think they're doing? Why would they—"
Some of those present thought it was a ridiculous question, though they numbered just a few. The Imperial force intended to bring its full power to bear on the Fourth Fleet. That much should have been obvious. But the Alliance leadership had never imagined such a daring assault being launched by an enemy being hemmed in on three sides. Caught in an enclosure formation, facing a more numerous enemy, the Imperial fleet would yield to its defensive instincts, they'd reasoned, contracting their battle lines and concentrating their force into a tight formation. Against this, the Alliance forces could then pour in from three sides at uniform velocity, surround them like a finely woven net, and concentrate their firepower to slowly, but most assuredly, shear away their capacity for resistance. That was how the Dagon annihilation had been fought 156 years ago, and praises were sung to this day of the two great generals who had emerged victorious then. This enemy, however, had not acted at all in accordance with the Alliance military's calculations.
"What in blazes is this? Has their commander even studied tactics? Who would fight a battle like this?"
Foolish words came streaming from the Vice Admiral's mouth. He stood up from his command seat and wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. A steady temperature of 16.5 degrees was maintained throughout the ship. He shouldn't have been breaking out in a sweat.
"Commander, what do we do?"
The voice of the staff officer calling him was shrill and lacking proper reserve. The tone grated on the Vice Admiral's nerves. Hadn't his staff officers been the ones insisting that the three-way advance was the unbeatable tactic? It only followed that contingency planning was their responsibility as well. What did they mean?
"What do we do?"
Still, this was neither the time nor place to be losing his temper. The fleet of Imperial warships numbered 20,000, and the Alliance's Fourth Fleet only 12,000. The Alliance's plans had been utterly derailed. They were supposed to surround and attack an enemy force of 20,000 ships with three fleets totaling 40,000. But now the Fourth Fleet was going to have to fight alone against an overwhelmingly larger force.
"Emergency messages to 2nd and 6th Fleets. Engaging enemy in Sector Alpha 7.4, Beta 3.9, Gamma -0.6. Requesting immediate support."
The Vice Admiral gave the order, but Lieutenant Commander Nan, communications chief of the flagship Leonidas, responded with desperate actions and an expression to match. Jamming signals from the Imperial fleet were eating into the Alliance fleet's comm network voraciously. Floating in the void of outer space, tens of thousands of electromagnetic jamming buoys, deployed on Reinhard's orders, were hard at work.
"In that case, send out courier launches, 2 of them to each fleet."
As he shouted those words, a flash of light from the display screen turned the Vice Admiral's face white for an instant. The enemy attack had begun, their neutron beam cannons firing synchronized volleys. Their vast outputs of energy and the accompanying bursts of light were such that it seemed the fundi of the soldiers' eyes might be scorched. Flashes of sparkling rainbow-colored brilliance, the sparks that flew in those instants when enemy beams struck energy neutralization fields, erupted throughout the Alliance's fleet. Low-energy particles collided at terrific speeds, annihilating one another in a cannibalistic phenomenon. Arms waving wildly, the Vice Admiral shouted,
"Vanguard formation! Return fire! All ships get ready for all-out war!" Vice Admiral Pastol's order had not been intercepted, but on the bridge of the Imperial fleet's flagship Brunhild, ripples of cold contempt danced in Reinhard's ice-blue eyes as he said to no one, "Your responses are slow, you incompetent fool." "Launch fighters, we're switching to close-quarters combat," ordered Rear Admiral Fahrenheit. A keen vitality shone in his face and resonated in his voice, born of the exultation of battle, coupled with the confidence that came of seizing the initiative. Even if the golden brat ends up taking the credit, the important thing is still to win. The single-seater, cross-winged fighter ships known as Valkyren launched from their giant carriers one after another. In the instant when they cut loose from their carriers, they had, due to momentum, already reached speeds exceeding those of the carriers. Neither catapult nor runway was needed. The Valkyren were small craft, and so their firepower was not as great, but they excelled in maneuverability and were extremely effective in a dogfight. The Alliance also had single-seat fighters corresponding to Valkyren. These were known as Spartanians. Flashes of exploding fusion furnaces ripped across every quarter, and maelstroms of unleashed energies shook the ships of both sides in chaotic swells. New clusters of energy beams lashed across the battle space, and dodging between them the Valkyren soared, four winged angels of death clad in glistening silver. The Alliance's Spartanians did not trail the Valkyren in fighting ability, but a terrible disadvantage dominated all beyond their nose cones, and they found beams awaiting them the moment they separated from their carriers, aiming to destroy both fighter and pilot together. 1 hour after the start of the battle, the Fourth Fleet's vanguard had been almost entirely destroyed by the withering onslaught of the Imperial Navy squadron under Fahrenheit's command. Of the 2,600 vessels composing the vanguard, not even 20% were still participating in combat. Some ships had been vaporized by fusion furnace explosions, others had avoided exploding but had been too severely damaged to continue fighting, and others still had light structural damage but now drifted uselessly through space, having lost most of their crew. In this dreadful condition, the front line's collapse seemed not a half step away. In the case of the battleship Nestor, the damage was limited to a single spot on the vessel's underbelly, but the neutron warhead that had penetrated there had exploded inside, unleashing a great swell of raging, killing particles that had swept through the entire ship, in an instant turning Nestor into a coffin for 660 officers and soldiers. For this reason, crewless Nestor continued to follow the final course input by its astrogator, and as it hurtled along on invisible rails of inertia, it grazed the nose of its confederate, Lemnos, just as Lemnos's main front cannons were unleashing a volley of fire at an enemy ship. Nestor intercepted the photon cannon volley at point-blank range and exploded soundlessly an instant later. One sec. I just lost my place. Nestor intercepted the photon cannon volley at point-blank range and exploded soundlessly an instant later, the energy of the exploding fusion furnace ripping through its neutralization field and hitting Lemnos head-on. There were two flashes of white light, one following the other like twins being born, and by the time they had faded, not even a fragment of inorganic matter remained. The crew of Lemnos had destroyed an allied vessel and received death as their recompense. "What are you people doing?"
That cry was Vice Admiral Pastol's. But the one who disdainfully murmured, What are you people doing?" was Rear Admiral Fahrenheit. Both had been looking on at that scene through the screens of their respective flagships. In the words of one was a cry of hopelessness and panic. The words of the other mocked, with all the confidence that comes of a comfortable margin. The difference in those two voices was at the same time the difference between the circumstances of their respective forces. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Jim Burke. Sounds like the gain on your mic is a bit too high, hearing some distortion on the louder parts. Okay, it is probably not just you.
Let me tweak it real quick. Thank you for telling me.
Oh, okay. Come on. There it is. Just gonna bump that down by a smidge here. That might help. Okay. Hopefully that will be better.
If it keeps doing it, tell me. Part 2. At that moment, the 2nd and 6th Fleets of the Alliance were reeling from shock, having only just learned of the sudden change of circumstances. Even so, they had not decided to veer from the original plan and were still advancing toward the battlefield at the same velocity as before. Vice Admiral Paeta, commander of the 2nd Fleet, was sitting in the command chair of the flagship Patroklos, jiggling one knee outside the crew's line of sight. Irritation and impatience kept it rocking non-stop. The fleet commander's psychological state was reflected in his subordinates, and the air on the bridge felt charged with electricity. Amid all that, the Vice Admiral noticed one man, and one man only, who didn't look especially bothered. After the slightest of hesitations, he called out his name. "Commodore Yang." "Sir?" "How do things look to you? Your opinion, please." Yang, having risen from his station chair, removed his beret again and lightly scratched through his black hair with one hand. "The enemy is probably trying to destroy our forces individually before we can rendezvous. Since the 4th Fleet is numerically smallest, it's only natural they'd try to get rid of them first. The ball's in their court as far as which target is most pressing, and they're making the most of the initiative." "Do you think the 4th Fleet can hold out?" "Both forces have clashed head-on, which means the advantage lies with the side outnumbering its opponent, and, moreover, with the side that strikes the initial blow." Yang's expression and tone of voice seemed indifferent. As Vice Admiral Paeta observed him, he kept opening his fist and then squeezing it shut, trying to exorcise his annoyance. "In any case, we need to get to the battlefield ASAP to reinforce the 4th Fleet. With any luck, we should be able to strike the enemy from behind. If we do that, we can turn the tide in one fell swoop." "That probably won't work, sir." Yang sounded unconcerned as ever, which almost made Paeta let his words pass by unacknowledged. The Vice Admiral had started to turn his head back toward the screen, but he stopped and looked again at the young staff officer. "What makes you say so?" "The fighting will already be over by the time we get there. The enemy will leave the battlefield, and before the 2nd and 6th Fleets can rendezvous, they'll circle around to the rear of one or the other and launch an attack there. Since the 6th Fleet is the smaller of the two, it's almost certain they'll be the ones targeted. The Empire's taken the initiative, and at present, they've still got it. I don't think we need to keep doing what they expect any further." "Well then, what do you propose?" "That we change tactics. Instead of rendezvousing with the 6th Fleet in that battle space, we go rendezvous with them now, without a moment to spare, and prepare a new battle space in that sector. If we combine the fleets, we'll have 28,000 vessels, and after that we can challenge them with better than 50-50 odds of victory." "Meaning you want me to just look the other way as the 4th Fleet is massacred?" A note of deliberate reproach was apparent in the Vice Admiral's tone. "That is one cold-blooded thing to say," he was thinking. "Even if we left right now, we wouldn't get there in time." Yang's tone was curt, whether he knew what was going on in the Vice Admiral's head or not. "But I won't abandon a friendly force." At the Vice Admiral's words, Yang shrugged his shoulders lightly. "Then, ultimately, their tactic of attacking each group separately will make easy prey of all 3 fleets." "Not necessarily. The 4th Fleet won't go down without a good fight. If they can keep holding out—" "I just told you it was hopeless, but—" "Commodore Yang, reality is made up of more than just cold-blooded calculation. The enemy commander is Count von Lohengramm. He's young and inexperienced. But Vice Admiral Pastole is a seasoned warrior forged in countless battles. Compared to that—" "Commander, he's inexperienced as you say, but his tactical planning—" "Enough, Commodore! The Vice Admiral cut him off, displeased. He couldn't hold back his disgust for this young staff officer who just wouldn't give him the answer he wanted. The Vice Admiral motioned for Yang to sit back down and turned his head back toward the screen. Part 3. 4 hours had passed since the start of the battle. By this point, the Fourth Fleet of the Alliance Navy could hardly be called a fleet at all. There was no tidy, well-organized battle formation, no unified chain of command. It was nothing more than scattered pockets of desperate resistance, isolated, cut off, single ships in every quarter waging a losing battle. The flagship Leonidas was now a colossal hunk of metal wandering the void. Within there was nothing left that lived. The body of Commander Pastol had been sucked out into the vacuum by the air pressure differential in the instant that concentrated enemy fire had opened up a large crack in the bridge's hull. What condition his corpse was in and where in space it was drifting, nobody knew. Thank you again for the heads up, Jim Baker. The gain was cranked way, way up. I do not recall doing that. It could have been like that for a while and I didn't notice. It was probably after an update to the software. So again, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate it a lot. Meanwhile, Reinhard knew by this point that he had just secured a complete victory. The report came in from Merkatz by way of his comm screen. Organized resistance has ended. From this point forward, we're to switch over to mop-up operations, but... No need. Sir? Merkatz's narrow eyes narrowed further. The battle's only 1/3 finished. You can leave the remnants be. We need to save our strength for the next battle. Further instructions will follow. Until then, get our formations reorganized. As you wish, Your Excellency. With a solemn bow of his head, Merkatz's image vanished from the comm screen. Reinhard looked back at his red-headed chief adjutant. Even he's changed his attitude just a little. Yes, he must have little choice. This is a great first-round victory, Kircheis thought. Even the Admiralty will have to admit Reinhard's tactical plan worked well. The soldiers will take heart, and the enemy will be stunned when they see their unbeatable formation destroyed. Which fleet do you think we should attack next, Kircheis? The one to starboard or to port? It's possible to circle around to the aft of either, but surely you've made up your mind already. Pretty much. Their Sixth Fleet, positioned to starboard, must have the weaker force strength, correct? Exactly. A satisfied smile appeared around the mouth of the young, blonde-haired commander. The enemy may be expecting that. That's the one slight concern I have, but... Reinhard shook his head. There's no danger of that. If they do guess what we're doing, they won't continue with a battle plan that uses divided forces. They'll try to rendezvous as early as they possibly can. After all, together they still outnumber us vastly. That they aren't doing so is proof that they don't understand our fleet's intent. We'll circle around to the Sixth Fleet's aft starboard flank and attack them there. How many hours will we need? Less than 4. Look at you, you'd worked it out already. Reinhard smiled again. When he smiled, his face was like a boy's. But what wiped that smile from his face in a heartbeat was the realization that several sets of eyes were looking intently his way. Reinhard would not show his smile easily to anyone but Kircheis. Relay that to the whole fleet. Gradually shift our course clockwise as we proceed, and attack the enemy's Sixth Fleet on its aft starboard flank. As you wish, Kircheis replied, but he was looking at his blonde-haired senior officer as though he still had something to say. Reinhard drew his brows together in suspicion and returned the stare. You have some objection? It isn't that. I was just wondering if we might let the men have a break, since we now have some time to spare. Oh, that's right. I hadn't realized. Reinhard issued orders that the soldiers be given breaks of an hour and a half each, to be taken in 2 shifts. During that time, they were to eat and rest up in their tank beds. A tank bed was essentially a large aquarium made of light plastic and filled to 30 centimeters depth with strongly salinated water, the temperature maintained at a constant 32 degrees centigrade. Anyone who lay floating in its interior would enjoy a state of perfect peace and quiet, isolated from all color, lighting, and heating, sound, and other external stimuli. Spending 1 hour in the tank was said to have the same effect on one's mind and body as 8 hours of sound sleep. There was nothing like it for quickly restoring soldiers worn down in body and spirit by combat. So I guess they just have sensory deprivation tanks. Or near as damn it, anyway. In small squads where tank bed facilities were lacking, stimulants were sometimes used, but oftentimes these were not just dangerous to the body, they had a bad effect on the military organization itself. Drug-addicted soldiers had absolutely no value as a human resource, so accordingly this measure was taken only in the worst of circumstances. Tell Nazi Germany that. Well, maybe. I mean, they certainly, I think it was Bayer, actually, or Bayer, was the big producer of their amphetamines, their crystal meth. I don't think it was crystal meth, but they were producing amphetamines and basically had a huge portion of their military force hopped up on speed. As did many militaries, actually. It's not just Nazi Germany. Quite a few have done it since. Where were we? The wounded were also being treated. It had been widely known since the late 1900s on the AD calendar that electrons could stimulate the body's cells, increasing their natural healing abilities by leaps. Add to that the development of cyborg technology, and an age had arrived in which 90% of wounded soldiers who managed to see a military doctor could be saved. Though, of course, it was possible to be driven to a state wherein death would be better. In any case, the crews of the Imperial Navy vessels were visited by a temporary period of peace and tranquility. Cheerful bustle swirled through the mess halls of every vessel. Though alcohol was forbidden, the crew members were in thrall of a drunkenness born of battle and victory, and the food tasted better to them than it actually was. "Even our young commander's actually pretty good, don't you think?" whispered some.
"Even our young commander's pretty good, don't you think?"
whispered some back and forth.
"I was thinking he was just here as decoration, with nothing going for him but his looks, but he's really quite the tactician. Maybe the best since Admiral Wood in the old days."
The question of why, and for whom, they and their unseen, unknown enemies were killing one another was nowhere to be heard among the soldiers at that time. They were simply and honestly rejoicing in their survival and their victory. But within the next few hours, a portion of these survivors would be added to the ranks of the newly dead. Foreshadowing, is that you? Part 4.
Vessel shadow sighted at 4:30. Identification impossible.
When the report was received from a destroyer in the rear guard, Vice Admiral Moore, commanding officer of the Alliance Navy's 6th Fleet, was in the middle of a meal with his staff officers. Knife hovering over his gluten cutlet, the Vice Admiral scowled at the officer who had delivered the message. Riveted by a gaze sharper than the knife, the officer felt frightened. Vice Admiral Moore was widely known to be a fair-minded but coarse man.
"At 4:30, you say?"
The Vice Admiral's voice was a match for his gaze.
Yes, sir, at 4:30. We can't tell yet if it's friendly or not."
"Oh, well, which 4:30 are we talking about? Morning or afternoon?" Caustic remarks notwithstanding, Moore broke off his meal and stepped out of the officers' mess. Looking back at his alarmed staff officers, his burly shoulders quivered as he laughed.
"Will you look at these deer-in-the-headlights faces? The enemy's in the same direction we're headed. They can't rightly be at 04:30, now can they?"
"Oh,
They can't rightly be at 04:30, now can they?"
The Vice Admiral continued to speak in a loud voice.
We're rushing toward the battlefield. The Second Fleet's no doubt taking the same action. That being the case, we can hit the enemy from behind, from both starboard and port. We have a very good chance of winning. No, in fact, we will definitely win. From the perspective of numbers, from the perspective of formation. But, Commander...
The man interrupting the Vice Admiral's foray into eloquence was one of the staff officers, Lieutenant Commander Lapp. He was wiping grease from his mouth with a handkerchief.
What?
What if the enemy's moved the battle space? Such a thing is certainly not outside the realm of...
You want to abandon the Fourth Fleet?
This is difficult to say, sir, but the junior officers are projecting that the Fourth Fleet has been defeated already. The Vice Admiral's excessively lush eyebrows drew together.
That's a bold and most disgraceful projection, isn't it, Commander? That's a bold and most disagreeable projection, isn't it, Commander? All that grease seems to have your mouth running like a well-oiled machine.
Embarrassed, Lieutenant Commander Lapp put away his handkerchief. By that time, they had ridden the intra-ship beltway as far as the bridge, when unexpectedly the gravitational control system lagged for a moment, and they both nearly stumbled. It had been forced by an acute change of course, though a measuring device was registering directional energy sufficient to destroy the ship just beyond the hull.
Enemy attacking aft starboard flank!
The comm channels of the Sixth Fleet erupted in surprised cries, which were immediately erased by static. Officers shuddered, for the confused transmissions themselves testified eloquently to the fact that the enemy was positioned very near.
Don't lose your heads, people!
Vice Admiral Moore's pep talk was half directed at himself. His regrets slapped him hard across his thick jowl. The fleet's cutting-edge warships were not deployed in the rear guard. There was no way the older vessels there could withstand an assault from behind.
The Imperial force is behind us.
Did that mean that the Fourth Fleet was destroyed, or had the Empire readied a large, separate force?
Intercept and open fire!
As confusion welled up in his heart, the Vice Admiral issued a bare minimum of orders, not yet able to resolve his confusion. The Imperial force commanded by Merkatz, a seasoned full admiral, had assumed a neat and orderly attack formation and launched the assault on the Alliance Navy's Sixth Fleet. Neutron beam cannons slung glittering flashes of death against the low-output force fields cast by the older Alliance vessels, piercing the fields and impaling the ships. Through his view screen, Merkatz looked on at a scene of dazzling fireballs blossoming and fading amid the darkness eternal. It was a sight that had become familiar over the last 40 years, but this time he felt something deep and powerful he had never felt before. Merkatz was no longer looking at Reinhard as merely that blonde porcelain doll. The initial victory had been no fluke. It was the proper result of a bold change in thinking, based on keen insight and careful decision-making. Allowing one's forces to be attacked from 3 directions just to launch separate attacks on a divided force before it could close the net. There was no way he could have done that. His comrades in arms from the old days were the same. This was only possible for a young man, one not yet shackled by convention. The era of old soldiers like us may have passed on already. Unwittingly, he had actually thought such a thing. Even during his moment of reflection, the battle was growing more fierce. The Imperial force drilled into the ranks of the Alliance like an auger, steadily gaining the upper hand both in exchanges of cannon fire and in close combat. It looked like the whole force was riding high, making the most of the advantage that came with drawing first blood. The Alliance force was launching a desperate counterattack, but with the commanders unable to recover from their confusion, there was little hope for much of a rally. Vice Admiral Moore, standing frozen like a temple sculpture in the midst of the bridge floor, shouted,
"All ships, come about!"
At last he had made up his mind. Up until then, he had only been saying,
"What's going on?"
over and over.
Commander,
Even if we turn around, we'll cause nothing but confusion. I think we should proceed full speed ahead while executing a clockwise change of course. Plow into the enemy from behind. Lieutenant Commander Lapp's suggestion collided with the Vice Admiral's burly frame and bounced off meaninglessly.
By the time we hit the enemy's backside, most of our ships would be destroyed. Turn and fire.
Yes, but...
Be quiet.
Vice Admiral Moore gave an angry shout that made his whole body quiver, and the lieutenant commander closed his mouth, understanding clearly that his commanding officer had lost his head. When the giant hulk of Pergamum, flagship of the Sixth Fleet, began to come about, the other vessels following behind it did likewise. But it was not an easy maneuver to accomplish while under fire. The seasoned Mercats leapt on his enemy's confusion right away. The beam cannons of the Imperial force struck hard with cascades of glowing beams that streaked across the sky like meteor showers. In every quarter, energy-neutralizing force fields overloaded and collapsed, and the Alliance's vessels were destroyed. The surging billows of energy already seen in the previous battlespace were beginning to form again in this one, and Vice Admiral Moore and Lieutenant Commander Lapp alike had the feeling that only the ships of the Alliance were being tossed by them.
"Multiple Spall vessels closing rapidly on Pergamum!" an operator shouted.
One of the screens was showing a large swarm of Valkyren, and in no time at all they occupied the screens of numerous consoles. Nimbly demonstrating their maneuverability, they came in firing beams at point-blank range.
It's gonna be a dogfight. Launch the Spartanians.
This order, as well, came too late and cost them dearly. The Valkyren had been waiting for the instant when the Spartanians would separate from their carriers. When a flood of glowing beams burst mercilessly forth, and the Alliance's fighter craft blew apart in balls of fire, deprived even of the right to die in battle.
"Commander, look at that!"
An operator was pointing at one of the screens. An Imperial battleship was closing in on them. And behind it, and behind what was behind it, and behind it, and behind what was behind it, what? One overlapping with the next could be seen the shadows of more vessels. Yes, okay.
"Commander, look at that!"
An operator was pointing at one of the screens. An Imperial battleship was closing in on them, and behind it, and behind what was behind it, one overlapping with the next, could be seen the shadows of more vessels. The bridge was suffused by an oppressive air of menace. Pergamum was now surrounded by multiple rings of ships.
"They're sending a flash signal," the operator reported in a near whisper.
See if you can decode it.
Vice Admiral Moore was silent. See if you can decode it. Vice Admiral Moore was silent. The prompting came from Lieutenant Commander Lapp. Even his voice was low and dry.
"Decoding. You are completely surrounded and without any means of escape. Surrender, and I promise to treat you graciously."
The decoded message repeated once and then ended, and countless stares and countless silences stabbed into the massive frame of Vice Admiral Moore. Every one of them was urging a decision from the fleet commander.
Surrender, he says.
The Vice Admiral's face turned a dark red as he growled out his answer.
Forget it. I may be a washout, but I won't be a coward.
20 seconds later, a white flash enveloped him. Part 5. The accumulated store of unease was just about to reach saturation point. An invisible thunderhead seemed to hang over the bridge of Patroklos, flagship of the Alliance Navy's Second Fleet. When would a blistering discharge come arcing down from it? As orders to assume a Stage 1 battle formation were issued, all crew were changing into spacesuits. Still, the unease was passing right through their suits, making them break out in gooseflesh. The 4th and 6th fleets have apparently been destroyed. We're all alone out here, and by now the enemy's force is larger than ours. I want information. What's going on? What's the present situation? Speaking out of turn was prohibited, but if they didn't say something, the unease would be unbearable. This wasn't in the plan. Weren't they going to catch an enemy half their size in a 3-way pinch, wipe them out, and raise a song of victory? Suddenly, an operator's voice rang out across the bridge from his microphone. "Enemy fleet closing!" "From either 1 or 2 o'clock," Yang murmured. Though he spoke only to himself, the following report came as if in answer. "Bearing 0110! Bearing 0110, elevation minus 11 degrees, closing at high speed." Yang did not respond to the tension that then gripped the bridge of the flagship Patroklos in its talons. This was all as he'd anticipated. The Imperial force had struck the Alliance 6th Fleet on its aft starboard flank and bored right on through to emerge from the fore on its port side, tracing a natural curve as it now turned its spearhead toward its last remaining enemy, the 2nd Fleet. With the 2nd Fleet advancing straight ahead, it only followed that the Imperial fleet should appear from somewhere between 1 and 2 o'clock.
"Battle stations!"
ordered Vice Admiral Paeta, and Yang thought, "You're too slow." To wait for the enemy to come to you and then fight back was the orthodox tactic, but in this case it was impossible to ignore the fact that Paeta's thoughts were locking up. Measures that needed to be taken also needed proper timing to work. With rapid maneuvers, it wouldn't have been impossible to hit the enemy force from behind and then coordinate with the 6th Fleet to catch them in a pincer movement. In battle, it was impossible to sacrifice no one. Yet at the same time, the effect of victory was lessened in inverse proportion to mounting losses. It was in finding the point that made both propositions compatible that tactics as a discipline found its raison d'etre.
Raison d'etre.
In other words, it meant getting the maximum effect from the minimum losses, or to put it more coldly, finding the most efficient way to murder your comrades. Yang wondered doubtfully whether his commander understood that. It was too late to do anything for those sacrificed already, and from the start this wasn't something that could be swept under the rug by saying, "It couldn't be helped." The military leadership should be hanging their heads in shame for their poor tactical leadership. But that would come later, after all was said and done. What they had to think about now was how to prevent an expansive reproduction of their mistake, and how to come up with some way of turning a disaster into a blessing. If regrets could bring back slain officers and soldiers, the brass should be shedding tears by the kilo leader. But, ultimately, they would be doing nothing more than playing at sorrow, wouldn't they?
"All ships, open fire!"
Whether that order came before or after, no one could tell. A flash of light strong enough to make people think their retinas had been fried stole the vision of all who were on the bridge. With a lag of half an instant, Patroklos's body was jostled by an explosive burst of energy, then tossed and turned in every direction. Noises of things falling over and objects colliding overlapped with screams and shouts of anger. Not even Yang was able to avoid falling down. He took a hard blow to the back and had the wind knocked out of him. As his helmet communicator picked up a chaotic jumble of noises and voices and a fierce flow of air from the surrounding area, Yang straightened out his breathing and covered his sightless eyes with the palms of his hands, protecting them, albeit after the fact. Who needed a dressing down over that one? Failing to adjust the screen's photoflux capacity was not an easy blunder to forgive. If this kind of thing kept happening, it would be a wonder if they didn't lose.
This is aft turret bridge. Please respond. Awaiting orders.
Engine room. This is the engine room. Bridge, respond, please. At last, Yang opened his eyes. An emerald fog hung over his whole field of vision. He sat up and noticed the person lying next to him. A thick and sticky, deeply hued fluid covered everything from his mouth down to his chest.
Commander,
Yang said in a low voice, staring closely at the Vice Admiral's face. He planted both his legs firmly and got to his feet. A fissure now ran through one section of the bulkhead, and the air pressure was dropping rapidly. It looked like a few who hadn't had their magnetic boots switched on had been sucked out. The opening, however, was being rapidly sealed by a vaporized bonding agent blown against it from the self-repair system's operations gun. Yang looked around the bridge. This was a mess. Hardly anyone was still standing. After confirming that his helmet communicator still worked, Yang started giving out instructions.
Commander Paeta is injured. Would a Navy surgeon and paramedics come to the bridge, please? Operations officers, find out how badly we're damaged and begin repairs. You can report in later. Please hurry. Aft turrets, all ships are already in combat, so you shouldn't need any particular instructions. Perform your assigned duties. Engine room, did you say something?
I was worried about things on the bridge, sir. No damage here.
Well, thank goodness for that. There was a note of sarcasm in his voice. The bridge is operational, as you can hear. Now I want you to calm down and focus on your duties.
He took another look around the bridge.
Is there an officer here who isn't injured?
One man stepped forward with a slightly perilous gait.
I'm all right, Commander. You are, Lieutenant Commander Lau of the Staff Officer Team.
The small-eyed, small-nosed face was peeking out of the spacesuit's helmet, looked about the same age as Yang. The small-eyed, small-nosed face peeking out of the spacesuit's helmet looked about the same age as Yang. In addition, 2 astrogators and 1 operator raised their hands and stood, but that was all.
Nobody else?
Yang slapped his helmet over where his cheek was. The Second Fleet's leadership had been essentially wiped out. A naval surgeon came running in with a team of paramedics. Quickly and efficiently, they checked out Vice Admiral Paeta and told Yang that a broken rib had punctured his lung when his chest slammed into the corner of a whatever. We'll just take the sentence from the top. A naval surgeon came running in with a team of paramedics. Quickly and efficiently, they checked out Vice Admiral Paeta and told Yang that a broken rib had punctured his lung when his chest slammed into the corner of a control panel.
He's had some pretty bad luck,
the doctor opined unnecessarily. On the other hand, one couldn't deny that Yang's luck had been good.
Commodore Yang,
Vice Admiral Paeta called his young staff officer, assailed by torments both physical and mental.
You take command of the fleet.
Me, sir?
You're the highest-ranked officer who's still in one piece. Show me what you've got as a tactician.
The Vice Admiral stopped speaking suddenly. He had lost consciousness. The Navy doctor called a robot car that served as an ambulance.
He thinks highly of you, doesn't he?
Said Lieutenant Commander Lau, impressed.
Does he? I wonder.
Lieutenant Commander Lau, unaware of the clashes of opinion between the Vice Admiral and Yang, gave a doubtful glance at that answer. Yang walked over to the comm board and flipped on the switch for external communication. It seemed the machines were built more sturdily than the people.
Attention, all ships. This is Fleet Commander Paeta's next in command, Staff Officer Commodore Yang.
Yang's voice raced through the empty spaces, piercing the void.
The flagship Patroclus has taken a hit, and Commander Paeta is seriously injured. On his order, I'm taking over command of the fleet.
Here he paused for the space of a single breath, giving his comrades the time they needed to recover from the shock.
Don't worry. If you follow my orders, you'll be all right. If you want to get back home alive, I need you to remain calm and do as I say.
At the present moment, our side is losing, but the only thing that matters is to be winning in the last moment. Ooh boy, even I'm talking awfully big. Yang was smiling wryly, but only on the inside. He didn't let it come to the surface. In the position of commander, you had to puff out your chest even when you felt like hanging your head. We're not going to lose. All ships concentrate on destroying your targets one by one until I send further instructions. Over. That transmission was being monitored by the Imperial forces as well. On the bridge of the flagship Brunhild, Reinhard raised his finely shaped eyebrows slightly. You're not going to lose? If they follow your orders, they'll be all right. It seems the rebel forces have people who can spout a lot of bluster, too. A cold glint like that of a shard of ice sheltered in his eyes. At this point, how do you intend to make up for your weaker force? Never mind. Let's just go with, show me what you've got. Kirkiais? Sir. Regroup our ranks. Tell all ships to assume spindle formation. You understand why? You intend a frontal breakthrough? Correct, as I've come to expect from you. Through Kirkiais, Reinhard's order was transmitted to every vessel in the Imperial force. But for his helmet, Yang would have taken off his beret to scratch through his black hair at that moment. When there was little difference in force strength, the most effective tactic for the attacking side was either the frontal breakthrough or the partial encirclement. He'd been guessing they would choose the more aggressive of the two, and it looked like he'd managed to hit the nail on the head. Lieutenant Commander Lau. Yes, Acting Commander, sir. The enemy's assuming a spindle formation. They're going to go for a frontal breakthrough. A frontal breakthrough? They're in high spirits after wiping out the 4th and 6th fleets. The Imperial force probably won't even think of anything else. Lieutenant Commander Lau glanced forlornly toward Yang as he provided his commentary. The faint-heartedness in the Alliance force, of which Lau's expression was representative, was the real fruit of the Empire's aggressive tactics, Yang reflected. How do you plan to counter it? I've got something in mind. But how do we communicate with the other ships? There's a danger that the enemy's listening to our transmissions. Flash signals have the same problem, and shuttles would take too long. Don't worry. Use multiple channels and tell all vessels to open the C4 circuits of their tactical computers. That'll be enough. If that's all we say, the enemy shouldn't understand even if they pick it up. Acting Commander, sir, does that mean Your Excellency had already worked out a plan and input the data long before this battle even started? Though I'd rather have seen it go to waste, said Yang. Perhaps in his tone of voice there was a slight note of self-justification. Icy glares had been standard recompense for prophets of defeat, even when Cassandra was queen in Troy. Never mind that. Hurry up and relay my instructions. Yes, sir, right away. Lieutenant Commander Lau hurried off at a jog toward the reoccupied communications officer's seat. With only 5 officers left unharmed, running the bridge was impossible, so about 10 men were summoned from the other departments. Warships didn't carry excess personnel, so that meant Patroklos would be short-handed elsewhere. It couldn't be avoided, though. Taking its time, the Imperial force prepared its spindle formation, and then began its charge. The Alliance ships met them with guns blazing, but the Imperial ships paid them no mind. As the distance between the two narrowed, erupting beams began to weave countless patterns of crisscrossing bars. Commanded by Fahrenheit, the Empire's vanguard squadron didn't slow as it came plunging into the ranks of the Alliance. All enemy ships are still charging us! The operator's voice was shrill and sharp. Yang looked up at the panel on the ceiling. A 270-degree wide-angle monitor was inset there. As the enemy vessels accelerated and closed the distance, they seemed to be leaping ferociously toward the throat of the Alliance. Their movements were dynamic and precise. In the face of that, the Alliance forces intercepting them couldn't help appearing sluggish and lackluster. Well, let's see what happens. In the command chair, Yang crossed his arms. He wasn't really as composed as he appeared to be. At present, the enemy's actions were within the bounds of Yang's predictions. The problem was what his allies would do. All would be fine if they went along with his plan, but one misstep and things would likely spin out of control, and the whole force would be put to flight. And what would he do then?
Scratch my head and pretend to look embarrassed, Yang told himself, answering his own question.
He couldn't predict everything, nor was there an infallibly correct move he could make. He wasn't responsible for things beyond his power. Part 6. The projection panel that made up the ceiling was covered in pulsating lights. The battleship Patroklos was now in the midst of a whirlpool of particle beams. Beams came at them from fore and aft, port and starboard, up and down, in thickness resembling clubs more than lances. Patroklos itself had opened fire as well, sending out exhalations of death and destruction that slammed against its enemies. An immense waste of human energy, or material energy, was being justified as the path toward victory and survival.
Enemy battleship closing. Judging by its model, it's probably Wallenstein.
Wallenstein had already taken considerable structural damage, having apparently charged straight through the fire. Its half-ruined main battery took aim at Patroklos from straight ahead, but Patroklos's response this time came swiftly.
Fire all main cannons. Target is right in front of us.
Oh, fire all main cannons. Target is right in front of us. The order came from Lieutenant Commander LOGH, who was temporarily doubling as gunnery chief. Patroklos's front cannons spat out synchronized beams of neutrons, scoring a direct hit on Wallenstein, dead in its midsection. After an instant's agonized buckling, the Imperial Navy's gargantuan battleship blew apart. Cheers rang out in the comm circuit of Yang's helmet, but their endnotes transformed into cries of renewed horror. Crashing haughtily through the shining white whirlpool of the fusion explosion, the next enemy vessel, Karnten, revealed its stately form. Yang acknowledged anew the dignity and grandeur of the Imperial Navy's formation, as well as its strong fighting spirit. It was clear that their powerful will to fight was one born of their overwhelming victories. For a moment, Yang was captivated by the thought that he might be witnessing the moment in which a great general was born.
Some generals are called wise and others fierce, but a commander who transcends those categories, who inspires in his men a faith unbreakable, is one whom I call great.
Yang had read those words in a history book.
Reinhard von Lohengramm must be quite young, but at the very least he's on his way to being great. He's a threat to Alliance forces, and to the old power structures in the Imperial Navy, he's most likely a threat as well.
Yang crossed his arms the other way and savored what small satisfaction he could in the thought that he was probably sitting right in the midst of history's current. Even during that interval, the state of the battlefield was changing moment by moment. Karnten and Patroklos had exchanged fire, but amid the confusion of battle they had moved apart, with neither having delivered a killing blow. Yang shifted his gaze to the simulated battlefield model that the tactical computer displayed on his monitor. Simplified shapes showed the distribution and condition of both forces. Backward rippling motions were occasionally running through the Alliance fleet, but overall the display showed the Imperial forces advance and the Alliance forces retreat. Those movements were gradually increasing in velocity. The Empire advanced, the Alliance fell back. The tiny reverse-propagating ripples vanished, and the more the simulated image was simplified, the more the effect was amplified. To most anyone's eyes, the Empire appeared ready to take victory by the hand, and the Alliance defeat by the tail.
"Looks like we've won," murmured Reinhard.
Meanwhile, Yang was also nodding toward Lieutenant Commander LOGH.
"Looks like it's going to work," he said, not vocalizing his relieved, "Thank heavens."
What had been worrying Yang was whether or not the ships on his own side would follow their instructions. He had confidence in the planned operation itself. At this point, there was no longer any way to win. It was, however, still possible to finish this without losing. But that could only happen if the other ships followed the plan. There were no doubt obstinate squadron commanders who scorned the idea of obeying a young and inexperienced commander like Yang, but in the absence of any other effective battle plan, there was little choice but to accept Yang's orders. If the desire for survival motivated them more than any sense of loyalty, though, Yang had not the slightest objection. A hint of puzzlement began to appear on Reinhard's face. He stood up from his seat, put both hands on the command console, and glared up at the overhead screen. Irritation was beginning to boil up all through his body. His allies were advancing and his enemies retreating. Hit by the frontal breakthrough attack, the Alliance's fleet was being split to the left and right. The scenes on the screen, the simulation that the tactical computer was The scenes on the screen, the simulation that the tactical computer was reconstructing on his monitor, the status reports coming from the Vanguard, all were describing exactly the same situation. Yet even so, a sound of distant thunder was beginning to rumble faintly in the back of his mind. He became aware of a sick feeling eating away at his nerves, the kind you get right before you realize that some dirty trick has just been played on you. He put the fist he'd made with his left hand up against his mouth, resting his teeth lightly on his index finger's second joint. And in that instant, for no reason whatsoever, he intuited what his enemy had in mind. "No!" That low cry, drowned out by the shouts of operators, reached the ears of no one. "Their force has split apart to port and starboard. They're going to rush past us along both flanks!" Amid a shocked stir, Reinhard cried out for his red-haired adjutant. "Kircheis, we've been had! The enemy wants to separate on both flanks and come around on our back side. They're using our frontal breakthrough against us! Damn them!" Do I have something I can bang? Much better. The golden-haired youth slammed his fist down against the command console. "What shall we do? Reverse course and intercept?" Kircheis's voice had lost none of its cool self-possession. That had a calming effect on the nerves of his momentarily enraged commanding officer. "Don't be absurd. You want me to be a greater imbecile than that Fourth Fleet's commander was? In that case, all we can do is advance." "Exactly." Reinhard nodded and gave orders to his communications officer. "All ships full speed ahead. Clamp onto the back side of the enemy rushing past us. Bear to the right, and hurry." Part 7. 30 minutes later, both formations were spread out in the shape of a ring. It was a strange sight. The Alliance's vanguard was engaged in a blistering assault on the Imperial fleet's tail end, while the Imperial vanguard was attacking one tail end of the forked Alliance fleet. Viewed from far away in the depths of space, it might have looked like two glittering, gargantuan serpents trying to swallow one another, each from the other's tail upward. Staring at the simulated model on the screen, Lieutenant Commander Lau said admiringly in Yang's direction, "I've never seen a battle formation like this." "I'd imagine not. It's a first for me, too." But Yang's words were only halfway true. Back when humanity had lived only on the surface of a backwater planet called Earth, this kind of formation had appeared on battlefields any number of times. Even the brilliant tactics employed by Count von Lohengramm had precedent in ground wars. Since ancient times, for better or worse, military geniuses inevitably took the stage during eras of war, turning on its head what had been orthodox tactical thought until their arrival. "Look at this miserable excuse for a battle formation!" The enraged cry rang out on the bridge of Brunhild. Reinhard suppressed his voice and snarled, "Won't this mean a battle of attrition?" A report was delivered to him of the death of a high-ranking officer. Rear Admiral LOGH had been blown away with the ship he had been aboard. Ignoring Reinhard's order to go full speed ahead, he had been trying to turn around and intercept the Alliance force when in mid-turn his ship had taken a direct hit from a neutron beam cannon. What sort of imbecile tries to turn a ship around right in front of enemies that are snapping at his heels? He has only himself to blame. Yet even so, there's no denying this casts a slight pall over the Empire's victory. Yang had understood from the moment he launched this operation that it would turn into a battle of attrition. The Imperial fleet's commander, Count von Lohengramm, was no fool. He wasn't likely to continue a fruitless battle that did nothing but increase the bloodshed and destruction. That had been the plan, to force the enemy into making that decision.
"The enemy should start pulling out soon," Yang said to Lieutenant Commander Lau. "Are we going to pursue?" "Let's not." The young commander shook his head. "Let's follow their lead. When they withdraw, so do we. We've done all we can up till now. There's no way we can continue fighting."
A conversation was being held on the bridge of Brunhild as well. "Kircheis, your thoughts?" "It might be about time for a tactical withdrawal." It was a reserved but unambiguous answer. "You think so too?" "If we do continue to fight, the damage on both sides will only increase. That would serve no military purpose." Reinhard nodded agreement, though a shade of dissatisfaction drifted across his youthful cheeks. Even if he accepted the reasoning, he wasn't satisfied emotionally. Is that frustration? Nothing of the sort, though I did want a more unambiguous victory. It's just a pity, is all, like leaving off the finishing touches of a painting. That's just like you, thought Kircheis, an unconscious half-smile forming around his mouth. You annihilated 2 of their fleets by attacking their forces separately, even while being hemmed in on 3 sides by a force twice the size of our own. And although the remaining fleet did swing around and get our back, you still fought them to a standstill. Isn't that enough? To hope for any more would be what we call just a little greedy. I know, and there's also the idea of leaving something to look forward to on another day. Though the 2 fleets continued to fire away at one another, the formation was at last spreading gradually outward, horizontally, as the 2 forces began putting distance between one another. The rate of fire slowed as well, and the density of the energies being unleashed thinned out precipitously. He's quite good. Better than I expected. Better than I had expected. In Reinhard's voice there was blended both irritation and praise. The young commander with the golden hair was deep in thought, and after a few minutes he called out for his adjutant. "What's the name of the Second Fleet's commander, the man who took charge midway through?" Commodore Yang Wen-Li." "That's right, Yang. Send him an egram in my name." Kircheis, smiling, asked, "What sort of message shall I send?" "My compliments to you, Commander, on a battle bravely fought. Be well till the day of our next encounter. Something along those lines should be fine." "As you wish." Kircheis relayed Reinhard's order to the communications officer, who responded with a slight, quizzical tilt of the head. Kircheis returned a pleasant smile. "Like you, officer, I'm in no hurry to fight such a tough opponent again. Better to have easy wins than to run into enemies we have to praise."
"Absolutely, sir,"
the comm officer replied with a nod. New orders from Reinhard rang out. "We are returning to Odin. All ships get in formation." After appending a few additional commands, we'll put in at Iserlohn Fortress along the way. Calculate the damage to friends and foes ASAP. Reinhard lowered the back of his command chair until he was facing the hemispherical ceiling almost directly and closed his eyes. He felt exhaustion come bubbling up from beneath the surface of his consciousness. It should be all right to sleep for just a little while, just a short rest. Kircheis would wake me if anything were to happen. Just leave the settings for the trip home to the inertial astrogation systems. For the leader of a defeated force, delegating squad operations to lower-ranking commanders and taking a nap were luxuries not permitted. Yang's greatest obligation was the recovery of those who remained, so he had to rush from battlespace to battlespace seeking survivors of the 4th and 6th fleets. Like with most things, the hardest part is picking up the pieces when it's over, thought Yang as he pulled off the helmet of his spacesuit and drank protein-enriched milk from a paper cup. You have an E-gram from the Imperial Fleet, Acting Commander, sir. The face of Lieutenant Commander Lau, who had come to inform him, was brimming with curiosity. The battle has been nothing but surprises from start to This battle has been nothing but surprises from start to finish, his expression was saying. Read it for me. All right. Here goes. My compliments to you, Commander, on a battle bravely fought. Be well till the day of our next encounter. Senior Admiral Reinhard von Lohengramm, Galactic Imperial Navy. Over. Bravely fought, he says? I'm so honored. Next time we meet, I'm gonna grind you into powder, was how Yang took the message. Next time we meet, I'm gonna grind you into powder, was how Yang took the message. Childishness was what he should probably call it, but it failed to arouse any ill will on his part. What should I do? Send a reply? Shall I send a reply? Yang answered what should I do? Shall I send a reply? Yang answered Lieutenant Commander Lau's question in a half-hearted tone. I doubt they're really expecting something like that. Never mind, just ignore it. Yes, sir. Instead, hurry up and get the survivors aboard. I want to save as many as we can. After taking his leave of Lieutenant Commander Lau, Yang turned his gaze to his console. The operations proposal he had submitted to Vice Admiral Paeta before the start of combat was lying on the floor beneath it. A bitter smile adorned Yang's mouth. He had never hoped to be proven right like this. How high would the death toll climb? Yang could imagine the faces at military HQ, every hair on their heads standing on end. It was in this way that the Battle of Astarte was concluded. On the side of the Empire, 2,448,600 personnel participated in combat. The Alliance fielded 4,065,900. The Empire deployed over 20,000 vessels. The Alliance more than 40,000. Deaths on the side of the Empire numbered over 153,400. For the Alliance, that number exceeded 1,508,900. Over 2,200 Imperial ships were either lost or destroyed, while the Alliance lost more than 22,600. The losses of the Alliance climbed to between 10 and 11 times those of the Empire. The Empire's invasion of the Astarte system, however, had been deflected just narrowly. Chapter 3. The Empire's Fading Glow. Part 1. Beyond a gracefully curving wall made of specialized glass, a dense profusion of strangely shaped boulders jutted upward, resembling nothing so much as temple bells. Twilight was unfolding her wings without a sound across the backdrop of sky, and to those looking on, particles of arid atmosphere seemed to have tinted the whole field of view with unplumbed depths of blue. The man standing motionless by the wall, hands folded casually behind his waist, turned only his head as he looked back into the room. At the end of his line of sight was a large, chalk-white console, beside which was a man in late middle age. Beside which... What? Yeah, no, they say was too many times. At the end of his line of sight was a large, chalk-white console, beside which was a man late in middle age, standing with impeccable posture.
So what you're telling me, Boltek, the man by the wall rumbled solemnly in a deep, masculine voice, is that the Empire won, but didn't win to excess.
That is correct, Landesherr. The Alliance was defeated, but it did not result in a total collapse of their military force.
So they recovered their footing?
They recovered their footing, they fought back, and they even managed to bloody the Empire's nose just a little. All in all, it made little difference to the Empire's victory, but since the Alliance didn't just lie there and take it either, I believe you can say it was a satisfactory outcome for we of Fezen. But what say you, Landesherr? The man by the wall, Adrian Rubinsky, fifth to hold the title of Landesherr in Fezen, now turned fully around to face the room's interior. He was an unusual-looking man. Though he appeared to be around 40 years of age, he had not a single hair on his head. His skin was dark. His eyebrows, eyes, nose, and mouth were all large, and though he could hardly be called handsome, he had a look that couldn't help leaving a vivid, powerful impression on others. His body brimmed with overwhelming spirit and vitality, and was blessed not only in stature, but also in its wide shoulders and sturdy ribs. 5 years in office, scorned by Empire and Alliance alike as the Black Fox of Fezen, he was ruler for life of this middleman trading state. I can't be all that satisfied, Boltek. There was irony in both the glance and the tone with which the odd-looking Landesherr responded to his trusted aide. This result was brought about by chance, not because we worked for it. We can't rely on good luck always being there in the future. We need to step up our data collection and analysis, and fill our hand with more trump cards for the future. Rubinsky, dressed casually in a black turtleneck and a light green suit, was hardly the picture of a nation's ruler as he approached a console at a leisurely stroll. Boltek's hands danced across the board, and in the console's central display a chart appeared. This is the distribution of both militaries, shown from directly overhead. Please have a look. It was the exact chart Kircheis had shown Reinhard 3 days prior. Imperial forces were red and Alliance forces is green. Imperial forces were red and Alliance forces green. From fore, port, and starboard, 3 green arrows were closing in on a red one. If the arrows were changed to points, it would look like a single dot of red within a triangle whose vertices were green. In terms of numbers, the Empire had 20,000, and the Alliance 40,000 altogether. Numerically, the Alliance had an overwhelming advantage. They did in terms of positioning as well. They were poised to encircle the Imperial force from 3 different angles. Except, wait a minute, isn't this... Rubinsky pressed a thick finger against the side of his forehead. Isn't this the same formation the Alliance used in the Dagon annihilation over 100 years ago? So that's it. They wanted to live that dream one more time, did they? Those people never evolve. Well, from a technical standpoint, the plan made sense. On paper, every plan is perfect. But in a real fight, the opponent is what matters. The opponent is what matters. The Empire's fleet commander. It was that golden brat I've been hearing about, right? Yes, sir. Count von Lohengramm. Rubinsky gave a smug laugh. 5 years ago, when his predecessor Valenkov had died suddenly, and Rubinsky, then 36, had first taken over the reins of power, the opposition had backed a seasoned candidate in his 50s, raising a loud ruckus about how a man in his 30s was too young to be head of state. And now here was Count von Lohengramm, 16 years younger than he had been at that time. For old soldiers who could do nothing but speak of precedent and custom, it seemed a most unpleasant age had begun. Can the Landesherr guess how Count von Lohengramm got himself out of this trap? Something in Boltek's tone said he was enjoying this. The Landesherr glanced at his aide and stared into the display. Then, as though it were the simplest thing in the world, he stated his conclusion. He took advantage of their divided forces and took them out one by one. It's the only way.
The Landesherr's aide gazed back at the object of his political fidelity, looking like he'd just been slapped across the face.
It was just as you say. Your keen insight amazes me, sir.
Rubinsky, with a relaxed, even brazen, little smile, accepted the compliment. There are often situations where the pros can't keep up with the amateurs. They see the minuses more than the pluses, and the dangers more than the opportunities. A specialist will look at this formation and think defeat is inevitable for the encircled Imperial force. But the net hasn't been pulled shut yet, and you see how it's actually the scattered Alliance forces that are vulnerable.
It's just as you say.
In short, what happened is that the Alliance underestimated Reinhard von Lohengramm's ability as a commander. Not that I can say I really blame them. Anyway, can you give me a detailed rundown of how things developed? The image on the display, obeying Boltek's commands, came to life and began to change. The red arrow turned toward one of the green arrows and made a beeline for it at high speed. Then, after crushing it, turned to another green arrow and destroyed it in turn. The Landesherr narrowed his eyes and watched intently as it turned yet again to face the third green arrow. He ordered Boltek to stop, still staring at the display, gave a sigh. A perfect 1-2 punch. An active, dynamic strategy. It's splendidly executed, but... He trailed off and tilted his head. But if things got to this point, the Empire should have had a near-perfect win. To get back in the game after things had gone this far south wouldn't be easy for the Alliance. The obvious end of this Alliance force completely falling apart. The obvious end of this is the Alliance force completely falling apart and being set to flight. Who was commanding that Third Alliance formation?
Vice Admiral Paeta at the start. But after they began the skibbly-doo-doo-doo, Vice Admiral Paeta at the start, but after the battle began, he was seriously injured when his flagship took a hit. Afterward, Commodore Wen-Li, a staff officer who was next in line, took over for him.
Wen-Li? I've heard that name somewhere.
He was in charge of evacuating El Facil 8 years ago.
Oh, yeah, that fellow, Rubinsky acknowledged. I remember thinking at the time that the Alliance had a pretty interesting man in its ranks, too. So, how did the hero of El Facil move his forces? In response, Rubinsky's top aide manipulated the display to show his superior the final stage of the Battle of Astarte. The green arrow divided to the left and right. As if trying to preempt that, the red arrow charged forward, attempting a frontal breakthrough. The green arrow, looking as though it had been split in half, raced backward along both sides of the red arrow, merged back together behind it, and launched an attack from its rear. Rubinsky made a low tone in the back of his throat. He had not expected to see an Alliance commander using tactics this refined. Moreover, the fact that he could grasp the situation and handle it so composedly, even while facing the prospect of his force completely crumbling, meant he was no more an ordinary commander than Count von Lohengramm was. The 5th Landesherr of Fezen had had his gaze riveted to the display for some time. That was some pretty exciting magic I just saw. At last, Rubinsky motioned to have the display turned off. After doing so, Boltek took a step back and awaited his next instructions. Wen-Li, was it? Get in touch with the office of our High Commissioner on Heinessen, and tell them to gather data on that Commodore ASAP. Whatever happened on El Facil was no fluke. That I can see very clearly now.
I'll see to it, sir.
No matter what the organization, no matter what the machine, what runs it, ultimately, is the personnel. The skill and competence of the ones in charge can turn a tiger into a cat, and can even do the opposite. And what the tiger sinks his fangs into is up to the tamer as well. It's vital we get a profile on this man. And in so doing, Rubinsky was thinking as he sent his aide from the room, we find a way to use him. The star known as Fezen was attended by 4 planets. 3 were gas giants, with the second planet alone possessing a hard planetary crust.
The composition of its atmosphere, nearly 80% nitrogen and almost 20% oxygen, differed little from that of humanity's birthplace. The biggest difference was that it had originally lacked carbon dioxide, so plant life had never existed there. There wasn't much water either. Even the terra-greening, having advanced from blue-green algae to disseminating the seeds of higher plants, had not yet turned the whole of the landscape into fertile, verdant fields. Only the well-irrigated regions of the planet's surface were adorned in colorful belts of green. The red regions were wastelands of boulders and sand, where weathered landscapes boasted spectacular vistas of bizarre geographical features. Phezzan was the name of the star as well as the name of the second planet. It was also the name of the system as a whole, and the name of its autonomous governing body, established in the year 373 of the Empire, which it held it as its territory. Its military force consisted of only a small fleet of patrol vessels, and its 2 billion Phezzanese, their passions ever bent on increasing profits, had long dominated the trade routes between the Galactic Empire and the Alliance. While subordinate to the Empire as a formality, it retained a de facto political independence that was nearly complete, and in terms of economic power displayed a vigor surpassing that of the two great powers. However, the long road that had led to this day had not been a smooth one, and every Landesherr since Leopold Rapp, the first Landesherr, had struggled with the political maneuvering necessary to secure Phezzan's position. Phezzan's national policy could be summed up in the phrase, "not so weak as to be taken lightly, and not so strong as to be feared," and it was because the numerical balance of power, Empire 48, Alliance 40, Phezzan 12, had not changed at all in the last half-century that the hard work of Phezzan's political authorities had been most vividly realized. If the power of the Empire and Phezzan were combined, they would be in an advantageous position over the Alliance, but even so, destroying the Alliance would be no easy task. On the other hand, if the Alliance and Phezzan were to form a coalition, it would be possible to thwart the Empire, though not to the point of overwhelming it. It was in the upkeep of this precarious, even artistic, balance that Phezzan's politico-military strategy showed its true worth. Phezzan mustn't become too strong. That could arouse opposition from both the Empire and the Alliance, putting both on their guard, causing them to eye an alliance with one another to wipe Phezzan from the face of the universe. If the Empire and Alliance were to join forces, they would command 88% of the power balance and could destroy Phezzan in a single battle. On the other hand, if Phezzan were too weak, its continued existence would lose its value, and it would become unable to compel either the Empire or the Alliance to respect its independence. When the Empire plotted to rob it of its autonomy, Phezzan would display intent to go over to the Alliance. When the Alliance conceived ambitions against it, Phezzan would turn with flirtatious eyes toward the Empire. Providing both sides with needed supplies, pushing into the Imperial and Alliance interiors, and ensnaring those in power, Phezzan had long survived by its wits. It would mean trouble if either the Empire or the Alliance were to succeed in conquering the other. Both powers needed to exist, maintaining their balance. If one were to fall, Phezzan would need to have the other fall at the same time, and without dragging Phezzan down with it. Phezzan charted the course of history, and without the exercise of military power. Instead, it used strategy and the power of its wealth. Building gigantic warships and huge cannons through bloodshed, ultimately inviting the exhaustion of national power and the ruin of society, that sort of foolishness they could leave to the two great powers. Lacking any means of protecting themselves save through slaughter and destruction were not the Galactic Empire, with its absolute monarchy, and the Free Planets Alliance, with its democratic republic, both in essence imbeciles driven... it's an incredibly obnoxious run-on sentence that ends in a question mark, so I have to retrace that one. Line breaks through me.
Lacking any means of protecting themselves, save through slaughter and destruction, were not the Galactic Empire, with its absolute monarchy, and the Free Planets Alliance, with its democratic republic, both in essence imbeciles driven by hidebound custom? Then let them both dance in the palm of Pheasant's hand, intoxicated by the legitimacy of their respective orthodoxies. Even so, there was something about Count von Lohengramm and about Yang, about their respective ascents to the galactic stage, that seemed to augur the coming of a new age. Pheasant would need to watch both of them carefully from now on. Though he might be overestimating them, it was always best to keep one's nose to the ground and one's hand full of trumps. Part 2. Night was enfolding the western hemisphere of Hauptplanet Odin in its soft and gentle hands. Whether Imperial territory or alliance, the revolving worlds could never escape the changing guard of night and day. Not even the great Emperor Rudolph, who had sought to dominate galactic space and all that was in it, could stop the revolution of heavenly bodies. Moreover, the motion of these heavenly bodies had no uniform periods. While one planet might rotate once every 18.5 hours, the rotational period of another might be 40 hours, each asserting its own precious individuality. On the other hand, even when humanity had dwelt on its original birthplace of Sol 3, the internal body clocks of humans had been running on a 25-hour cycle, 1 hour longer than that world's rotational period. Each individual adjusted this for a life lived in 24-hour increments. It was as a custom that the 24-hour clock had been established. When humanity achieved interstellar flight, that had meant facing the difficult problem of adjusting psychologically to days and nights of widely varying length. Inside spaceships, in cities floating in space, on planets that for any number of reasons required an artificial environment, this was not much of a problem. They simply synchronized the environment to the 24-hour lifestyle. Artificial lighting made the daytime bright and the night dark. In these kinds of places, they could adjust the temperature to be lowest just before dawn, and between summer and winter change not only the temperature, but also the length of the nights. Furthermore, on worlds where the periods of rotation were extremely long or short, a 24-hour day could be enforced by regulation. People would start to say, "It'll be night all day today. I hear the sun comes up tomorrow." Or, "On this planet you can see sunsets twice a day." The trouble occurred rather on planets with near Earth-like rotational periods of 21.5 hours or 27 hours, where, after much trial and error, the population would divide into one faction in favor of splitting the orbital period into 24 equal divisions and using the planetary local time, and another in favor of enduring the various inconveniences of using the standard 24-hour system. Whatever they settled on, there would be nothing else to do but to steel one's nerves and to get used to it. 24 hours is a day, and 365 days is a year. This so-called standard calendar was used both in the Empire and in the Alliance. January 1st in the Galactic Empire was January 1st in the Free Planets Alliance as well. "There's no need to remain shackled by the bonds of Earth forever," was a common refrain. "Humanity doesn't revolve around Earth any longer, and the space-era calendar is already in force. Shouldn't we set up new standards for keeping time?" There were those among the old equals bad that made such arguments, but when asked what these new standards should be, there was never any answer that everyone could agree on. Ultimately, the age-old custom received the greatest, if not necessarily the most enthusiastic, amount of support, and continued even to this day. The bonds of Earth extended to weights and measures as well. 1 gram was equal to 1 cubic centimeter of water, weighed under Earth's gravity at 4 degrees centigrade. In like manner, 1 centimeter was roughly equal to 1/4 billionth the length of the Earth's circumference. These units were These units as well were in common use by the entire star-spanning society of humanity. Emperor Rudolf had made an effort to change the units of weights and measurement. Seeking to standardize all the units, he had defined the height of his own body as 1 Kaiserfaden, and his own body weight as 1 Kaisercentner. However, this system was never put into action. Not because it was altogether illogical, though. Clerf, who was Secretary of the Treasury at that time, was granted an audience with the Emperor, at which time he respectfully submitted a single datum. It was a trial calculation of the expenditure that would be necessary to change the units of weights and measures, based on the assumption that doing so would necessitate swapping out every computer chip and measuring device throughout the whole of the settled galaxy. At that time, the unit of currency had only just been changed from credits to imperial marks, and the story goes that the number of zeros lined up on the paper had been sufficient to daunt even the ever-obstinate Rudolf. In this way, the meter and the gram were suffered... In this way, the meter and the gram suffered their continued existence, though the current prevailing theory was that Clerf's estimate had been an obviously inflated figure, and that Clerf, whose meekness had been considered his only saving grace, had in fact dared a subtle show of resistance to Rudolf's boundless self-deification. In the stately Neu-Sanssouci Palace, residence of the Emperor of the Galactic Empire revealed itself beneath the night sky. Buildings large and small, freestanding and interconnected, innumerable fountains, natural and artificial forests, sunken rose gardens, sculptures, flower beds, gazebos, and an endless succession of lawns were enveloped in pale silver light by ingenious illumination effects, designed with care not to irritate the optic nerve. This palace was the political crossroads of a government that ruled more than 1,000 star systems. Government offices were laid out around its perimeter, but there was not a tall building among them to be found. Their main offices were underground, for it was an unforgivable act of disrespect for a subject to look down from a high position upon the Emperor's palace. Even the many satellites that orbited Odin's skies never, ever passed directly over the palace. Over 50,000 chamberlains and ladies-in-waiting worked at the palace. It was an age when the use of people to perform easily automated tasks proved the height of one's position and the greatness of one's authority. Cooking, cleaning, guiding visitors, maintaining the gardens, caring for the free-roaming deer, all of these were accomplished by human hands. This was the luxury of a king. There were no beltways or escalators at the palace. You had to use your own legs to walk its corridors and ascend or descend its staircases. This was true even for the Emperor himself. Rudolf the Great had believed that physical strength, too, was a requisite of rulership. How could one shoulder the burden of this vast empire if he couldn't even walk on his own 2 feet? Within the palace were several audience chambers, and that evening the Black Pearl Room was packed with high officials beyond counting. A ceremony would be held tonight to bestow the scepter of an imperial marshal upon Count Reinhard von Lohengramm, who had smitten the brutish rebel forces at the Battle of Astarte, and there caused the light of the Emperor's authority to shine gloriously. An imperial marshal was not merely 1 rank above senior admiral, nor did the rank come only with a lifelong pension of 2.5 million imperial marks per year. An imperial marshal was also not punishable under criminal law for any offense save high treason, and could establish an admiralitat. Oh my gosh, I just lost my sight. No, I can't see! I'm blind! Yes. An imperial marshal was not merely 1 rank above senior admiral, nor did the rank come only with a lifelong pension of 2.5 million imperial marks per year. An imperial marshal was also not punishable under criminal law for any offense save high treason, and could establish an admiralitat, or bureau, Admiralitort, or bureau in which he was free to hire or dismiss staff as well, at will. At present, there were only 4 imperial marshals who enjoyed these privileges, though tonight they would become 5 when Count Reinhard von Lohengramm was added to their number. Moreover, it was going around that Count von Lohengramm would also be made Vice-Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Space Armada, placing half of its 18 fleets under his command.
Next he'll be made one of the peerage, from Count to Marquis.
Some were whispering thus to one another off in the recesses of the vast Black Pearl Room. Along with fire, humanity's great friend down through the ages had been gossip. Those who adored this friend existed in every era under every circumstance, ceasing neither in luxurious palace nor in homely ghetto. Positioned nearest the Emperor's throne, those who held the highest positions in the Empire stood motionless. High-born aristocrats, high-ranking civilian and military officials, and those holding multiple titles. Separated by a red carpet 6 meters wide, 200 craftsmen had woven it over the course of 450 years, they had formed 2 ranks. On one side was a row of civil officials, with Marquis Lichtenlad occupying the highest position. Marquis Lichtenlad, the imperial government's Minister of State, was presiding over cabinet meetings as acting imperial prime minister. He was an old man of 75, with a pointed nose and silver hair like new-fallen snow, possessed of a glint in his eye more stern than penetrating. Moving downstream from him were Minister of Finances Gerlach, Minister of the Interior Flegel, Minister of Justice Lump, Minister of Science Wilhelm, Minister of the Palace Interior Neukorn, Chief Secretary of the Cabinet Kielmansek. They and others like them were sitting in rows. On the opposite side were rows of military officials, Imperial Marshal Ehrenberg, who was Minister of Military Affairs, Imperial Marshal Steinhoff, the Secretary General of Imperial Military Command Headquarters, Imperial Marshal Krasen, the Commissioner of Staff, Imperial Marshal Muckenberger, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Space Armada, Senior Admiral Offresser, Commissioner of Armored Grenadier Corps, Senior Admiral Ramersdorf, Commissioner of the Imperial Guard, Admiral Klammer, Commissioner of the Military Police, the commanding officers of the 18 fleets. Oh, I'm not going to reread that, but suffice it to say, it's saying it's going to continue listing, but it's not going to continue listing for our sanity. I think you're only ever going to hear half of those names again. In any significant capacity. Some, I think, get another mention. At the clear, resounding blare of an old-fashioned trumpet, the whole assembly began to straighten their posture. There was a rustling as of leaves in the wind, and then it quieted. The coordinator of ceremonies' voice pounded the attendees' eardrums, announcing the entrance of the highest honored. Ruler of all humanity, sovereign of all the universe, defender of order and laws that govern the heavenly realm, Kaiser of the sacred and inviolable Galactic Empire, His Highness Friedrich the Fourth. Oh. The solemn melody of the Empire's national anthem swelled up on the heels of his last word. All present bowed their heads deeply, as though something were pressing down on their necks. Perhaps some of them were counting under their breaths. When they slowly raised their heads, their emperor was sitting in his gilded, luxurious seat. Friedrich the Fourth, 36th Emperor of the Galactic Empire. Oh, that's a period, not a comma. Friedrich the Fourth, 36th Emperor of the Galactic Empire. At age 63, he was a man who gave an impression of being oddly worn out. Though he wasn't quite elderly, there was something about him that made people want to call him old. He had almost no interest in the affairs of state, nor did he seem to have the ability or will to actively use the absolute power that he had. Emperor Friedrich IV, a feeble man who bore the twilight gleam of his mighty ancestor Rudolf, his polar opposite. The Emperor had lost his Empress 10 years prior. It had not been some intractable disease, just a cold that had gotten worse and developed into pneumonia. Why am I having difficulty with consonants? The Emperor had lost his Empress 10 years prior. It had not been some intractable disease, just a cold that had gotten worse and developed into pneumonia. Cancer had been conquered in distant antiquity, but driving the common cold from the list of maladies had, as one historian of the Alliance so maliciously put it, been impossible even for the glory and power of Rudolph the Great. Since then, the Emperor had bestowed on one of his mistresses the title of Countess, or Graffin, Grunewald. Countess Grunewald, making her his de facto wife, although he refrained from making her empress. But because that mistress was not highborn, she refrained from attending official state functions, and as usual did not show her lovely face before the court that night. Countess von Grunewald's name was Countess von Grunewald's real name was Anna Rose. In a sonorous voice, the coordinator of ceremonies called for the man of the hour to come forth. Lord Reinhard, Count von Lohengramm. This time there was no need to bow deeply, so all those assembled turned their eyes toward the young military officer walking across the carpet toward them. There were sighs of admiration from among the noble ladies. Even those who harbored hostility toward Reinhard, to wit, the greater part of the attendees, couldn't help acknowledging his incomparable good looks. His face was like that of a doll crafted from the finest Baishi porcelain, though his eyes were too piercing for a doll's, his expression too intense and strong. If not for the Emperor's indulgence with Reinhard's elder sister Anna Rose and the expression Reinhard wore at that moment, backbiting gossip of sovereign subjects... I got lost in the sauce. If not for the Emperor's indulgence with Reinhard's elder sister Anna Rose and the expression Reinhard wore at that moment, backbiting gossip of sovereign subject sodomy would likely have been inevitable. With a brisk step befitting an officer of the military, Reinhard passed through the jumble of onlookers' varied emotions, coming at last to stand before the throne, where, with a reverence felt nowhere in his heart, he bowed to one knee. In that posture, he waited to be graced by the words of his sovereign. At official functions, subjects were not allowed to address the Emperor.
Count von Lohengramm, your recent military exploits have been truly splendid,
the Emperor said, speaking in a voice devoid of originality or character. If I may be so bold, it was done wholly through the grace of your Majesty's authority. Reinhard's answer had also been lacking in originality, but that was somewhat due to calculation and self-restraint. Even if he were to say something clever, he was not talking to someone capable of understanding cleverness, and doing so would only stoke the hostilities of those in attendance. To Reinhard, that one piece of paper that the Emperor took from the conductor of ceremonies and began reading aloud was far more important.
In recognition of thy success in the subjugation of rebel forces in the Astartes star system, I hereby appoint thee, Count Reinhard von Lohengramm, to the office of the Imperial Marshal. Furthermore, I do name thee Vice Commander of the Imperial Space Armada and place half its vessels under thy command. March 19, year 487 of the Imperial calendar, Friedrich IV, Emperor of the Galactic Empire.
Reinhard rose, ascended the steps, and, bowing deeply, received his letter of appointment. At the same time, the scepter of an imperial marshal was given him. In that instant, Count Reinhard von Lohengramm became an imperial marshal. Even as a brilliant smile surfaced on his face, Reinhard felt no satisfaction at all inside. This was nothing more than the first step on the long road he had to travel, the road toward taking the place of that bumbling fool who had used his power to steal away his sister.
A 20-year-old Imperial Marshal.
That low murmur had come from Senior Admiral Offresser, Commissioner of the Armored Grenadier Corps. He was a large, well-built man in his late 40s. A scar carved into his left cheekbone by an Alliance soldier's laser was a vivid purple. Deliberately left partially unhealed, it announced to the world that he was a fierce and battle-hardened general.
Since when was the glorious Imperial Space Armada reduced to being a toddler's toy, Excellency?
The man to whom he so provocatively whispered was the one who had just had half the men under his command stolen from him by Reinhard. Imperial Marshal Murchenberger, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Space Armada, arched a graying eyebrow just slightly.
So you say, my lord, but you can't deny that the Golden Brat is a talented tactician. It's a fact he destroyed rebel forces despite being outnumbered, and his talents have even silenced battle-hardened veterans like Mercats. Indeed, the man does look like he's had his fangs pulled.
Casting a glance toward Admiral Mercatz, standing silent amid a row of military officers, Offresser gave a merciless critique.
Well, it's true the brat did defeat them. One victory by itself might just be a fluke. If you ask me, all I can think is that the enemy just didn't know what they were doing. Victory and defeat are ultimately relative, after all. You're speaking rather loudly.
Though he spoke reprovingly, the Imperial Marshal had not denied the content of what the senior admiral had said. Reinhard's achievement was not an easy thing for high-born nobles and old-guard admirals to accept. The time and place being what it was, however, the Imperial Marshal apparently felt a need to change the subject.
About that particular enemy, by the way, have you ever heard of a commander by the name of Yang? Let me think. I don't remember anyone by that name. What about him? In the recent battle, he was the man who stopped the rebel force from completely disintegrating and brought about the death of Rear Admiral LOGH. Oh? He seems to possess quite an aptitude for the work of a general. I have information that even our blonde-haired whelp had his nose tweaked by the man. And you're not glad to hear...
I think I've got the characters confused. This is going to happen more than once, by the way. Mockenberger. Okay, so the Imperial Marshal... I did have them right, I think.
He seems to possess quite an aptitude for the work of a general. I have information that even our blonde-haired whelp had his nose tweaked by the man. And you're not glad to hear it? I would be if this were only about Reinhard, but do you think they pick and choose who to fight when they go to battle?
As might be expected, there was a note of disgust in the Imperial Marshal's voice, at which Offresser awkwardly shrugged his thick shoulders. In the Black Pearl Room, music was beginning to play again. It was Thy Courage Doth Walküren Adore, a piece composed in praise of the military officers who gave their all in service of king and country. The curtain was now beginning to fall on what for the high-born nobles had been a most unpleasant ceremony. Captain Siegfried Kircheis, together with the other soldiers of the field officer class, was waiting in the Amethyst Room, which was separated by a wide corridor from the site of the ceremony itself. Kircheis, as he was neither a noble nor an admiral, lacked the qualifications needed for entrance into the Black Pearl Room. It had been decided over the past 2 days, however, that he would be promoted to Rear Admiral, skipping over Commodore to a position in which he would be called Excellency. When that happened, he would be excluded no longer from elegant ceremonies. Every time Reinhard climbs a rung in the hierarchy, I get pulled up behind him. Kircheis trembled just slightly. Although he didn't think of himself as lacking in talent, the speed of his rise was certainly extraordinary, and it would be disastrous to think it due entirely to his own ability.
Captain Siegfried Kircheis, correct? Said a soft voice from his side.
An officer who looked to be in his early 30s was standing in Kircheis's line of sight. He wore a captain's insignia. He was a tall man, though not so tall as Kircheis, with pale brown eyes, a sickly white complexion, and lots of early gray in his dark head of hair. That's right. And who might you be? Captain Paul von Oberstein. This is my first time meeting you. Just as he spoke these words, Kircheis was startled to see a strange light well up in his eyes. I beg your pardon, murmured the man calling himself von Oberstein. He had read from Kircheis's expression what had happened. Something must be wrong with my artificial eyes. I'm sorry if I startled you. I'll make it a point to have them replaced. Tomorrow, maybe. They're artificial? I'm sorry, then. I'm the one who should beg your pardon. No, not at all. Thanks to these things, with their integrated photonic computers, I can get along without any disability whatsoever. They just don't seem to last very long, do they? Were you wounded in battle? No, I've been like this since birth. Had I been born in Rudolph the Great's generation, I'd have been caught and disposed of by that Genetic Inferiority Elimination Act. Vibrations of air became sound that just barely reached the lower limits of human hearing, and yet that was enough to make Kircheis gasp. It went without saying that comments sounding critical of Rudolph the Great were grounds for charges of lèse-majesté. You have a fine commander, Captain Kircheis, von Oberstein added in a slightly louder voice, yet it was still nothing more than a whisper. And by a fine commander, I mean someone who can make the most of the talents of his subordinates. There are so very few of them in the service right now. Count von Lohengramm is different, though. He's most impressive for one so young. It's a hard thing for the powerful to turn a page, apparently. It is a hard thing for the powerful high-born families to understand, though, caught up in their lineage-obsessed mentality. Kircheis's trap detector was ringing like mad in the back of his mind. How could he be sure that this man von Oberstein wasn't some marionette sent by someone hoping for Reinhard to slip up? So tell me, what unit are you serving in? He said, casually changing the subject. Up until now, I've been in the data processing department at Command HQ, but just recently I received orders to serve as a staff officer in the fleet stationed at Iserlohn. Von Oberstein smiled thinly after his reply. Oh, I had them flipped. Okay, my bad. So tell me, what unit are you serving in? Up until now, I've been in the data processing department at Command HQ. No, I think I had it right. No, I'm wrong. Up until now, I've been in the data processing department at Command HQ, but just recently I received orders to serve as a staff officer in the fleet stationed at Iserlohn. Von Oberstein smiled thinly after his reply. You seem to be on your guard, Captain. At that instant, an embarrassed Kircheis was just about to say something when he caught sight of Reinhard coming into the room. The ceremony was over, it seemed. Kircheis, tomorrow, Reinhard began to say, but then he noticed the pale man standing next to his subordinate. Von Oberstein saluted and introduced himself, then, after brief and conventional words of congratulation, turned and departed. Reinhard and Kircheis went out into the corridor. Tonight they would be staying in a small guest house in an out-of-the-way corner of the palace grounds. It was a 15-minute walk through the gardens to get there. Kircheis, Reinhard said as they came out underneath the night sky, I'm meeting my sister tomorrow. I'm sure you're coming too. It's all right for me to come along? Why so reserved at this point? We're family. Reinhard smiled like a young boy, but then reeled himself back in and lowered his voice just a little. By the way, who was that man just now? Something about him bothers me a little. Kircheis gave a brief overview of the situation and further opined that he was somehow a mysterious fellow. Reinhard's perfectly formed brows had furrowed slightly as he was listening. A mysterious fellow indeed, he agreed. I don't know what he has in mind cozying up to you like that, but it would pay to be on your guard. Of course, with as many enemies as we have, being on one's guard isn't exactly easy either. Both of the men smiled together. Part 3. The residence of Countess Anna Rose von Grunwald was located in another nook of the Neu-Sanssouci Palace. Though visiting it required a 10-minute ride in a flamboyantly decorated land car used only at court. For someone like Kircheis, walking would have been easier, but when a land car was sent round by the Ministry of the For someone like Kircheis, walking would have been easier, but when a land car was sent round by the Ministry of the Palace Interior as a token of His Imperial Highness's generosity, there was nothing to do but get in. The mansion they were bound for was by the shore of a lake grown thickly about but with lindenbaum trees, built in a simple, clean style of architecture that fit its mistress well. When he spotted Anna Rose's slender, elegant figure standing out on the porch, Reinhard leapt from the still-moving land car and hurried to her at a trot. "Anna Rose, my big sister!" Anna Rose greeted her younger brother with a smile that was like sunlight in the spring.
"Reinhard, it's wonderful you've come, and even Shig is here."
"The important thing is that you're looking well too, Miss Anna Rose."
"Thank you. Now come inside, both of you. I've been waiting for you the past few days now."
She hasn't changed a bit since old times, thought Kircheis. That gentle kindness, that unaffected purity, impossible to mar, though all the emperor's might be brought against it. Let me try that again. She hasn't changed a bit since old times, thought Kircheis. That gentle kindness, that unaffected purity, impossible to mar, though all the emperor's might be brought against it.
"I'll put on some coffee. Have some Kelsey plum cake, too. I baked it myself, so I'm not sure if it'll be to your tastes or not. Try this and tell me."
"We shall align our tastes to it," Reinhard answered, laughing. The living room was just the right size, and a relaxed, friendly atmosphere filled its space. The three young people shared equally in the illusion that the spirits of time had moved that room alone back 10 years in time. The clink of coffee cups as they touched one another, the clean tablecloth, the aroma of a slight touch of vanilla essence that was mixed into the Kelsey cake. Glimpses of a singular joy were reflected in all of these things. Anna Rose was wearing a little smile as she sliced and parceled out the cake with deft, fluid movements.
"Every once in a while someone will tell me the kitchen is no place for a countess, but no matter what they say, I enjoy it so much I just can't help myself, though it is a lot of hard work not relying on machines very much."
The coffee was brewed and the cream poured in. There was homemade cake and conversation without the slightest concern of ulterior motives. For once, their hearts were at ease.
"Reinhard always wants to have his way, Shig. I can only imagine all the trouble he must put you through."
"No, not at—"
"You can say what you think."
"You can say what you think."
"Reinhard, stop teasing him. Oh, I just remembered. I have some delicious vin rosé that Viscountess Schaffhausen gave me. It's in the cellar, so I wonder if I could have you go and get it. Sorry to send His Excellency the Imperial Marshal on errands, though."
"Now you're the one teasing me. But yes, my lady, whether for errands or whatever else, consider me at your service." Anna Rose and Kircheis stayed behind. Anna Rose turned her little smile toward her younger brother's best friend.
"Shig, thank you for always being there for my brother."
"It's nothing at all. I'm the one who's always being looked out for. Since I'm not an aristocrat, it seems a bit much for me, making captain at my age."
"You'll be a rear admiral soon enough. I've heard the news. Congratulations."
"Thank you very much." Kircheis's earlobes started to feel hot.
"My brother never says so, and maybe he doesn't realize it himself, but Shig, he really does depend on you. So please, somehow, take good care of him from now on, too."
"I'm honored that someone like me—"
"Shig, you should recognize your own talents more. My brother has a talent, probably a talent that no one else has. But he isn't as mature as you are. He's a bit like an antelope that gets so caught up in the speed of his legs that he runs right off a cliff. I've known him since he was born, so I can say things like that. Miss Anna Rose, please, Shig, I'm begging you, watch over Reinhard. Don't let him lose his footing on those cliffs. If you see the signs of it, scold and nag. If the warning comes from you, he'll listen. The day he stops listening to you is the day my brother is finished. He'll have proven all by himself that no matter how much raw talent he may have had, he lacked ability to perfect it. That little smile had disappeared already from Anna Rose's lovely countenance. In her sapphire eyes, a deeper blue than those of her brother, there hovered the shadow of something like sorrow. An invisible blade glided over Kircheis's heart. That's right, things aren't the same as 10 years ago. Reinhard and I aren't neighborhood boys anymore, and Anna Rose isn't that domestic-minded little girl anymore. The Emperor's favored mistress, the Imperial Marshal, and his top aide. The three of us standing amid the fragrance and stench of Imperial power. If it's within my ability, I'll do anything, Miss Anna Rose. Somehow, Kircheis's voice managed to obey the will of its master as he struggled to contain his emotions. Please believe in my loyalty toward Reinhard. I will never do anything that would betray your wishes, Miss Anna Rose. Thank you, Sheik. I'm sorry. I'm always asking too much of you. But other than you, there's no one I can rely on. Please, find some way to forgive me. I want the two of you to rely on me, Kircheis murmured in his heart. Ever since that moment 10 years ago when I heard you say, please be a good friend to my brother, it's what I've always wanted. 10 years ago. Again, Kircheis felt that pain in his heart. If he had been his present age 10 years ago, he would never have handed Anna Rose over into the Emperor's hands. No matter what the cost, he would have taken those two siblings and fled, probably to the Free Planets Alliance. And by this time, he might even be an officer in the Alliance military. But back then, he hadn't the ability, and he had lacked even a clear grasp of his own desires. Now, things were different. But 10 years or more in the past, there had been nothing he could do. Why couldn't people be the ages they needed to be at the most important moments in their lives? You could have put this in an easier place to find. Those words announced the return of Reinhard. Yes, your hard work is much appreciated, but your efforts in seeking it out bring their own reward. I'll go get the glasses. Times such as these were fleeting, though to have them at all was to be counted a blessing. Kircheis told himself that. The next battle, which would surely be coming, was not something he could allow himself to shrink from. And that was chapters 2 and 3 of Good Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Volume 1, Dawn, by Yoshiki Tanaka. That one was kind of rough, and I apologize for that. There are going to be a very large number of cast members in this. So I'm going to have to get to work to practicing witchcraft, practicing some voices to use for some of them, as well as getting some of them straight. A couple of them blend together for me, because it's been a while since I read the series, or watched the series. I will do my best to bone up and remember who the characters are before I have to worry about them. Yeah, that's it. So far as I know, next week's schedule will remain the same. For this week, wherein, again, I stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, U.S. East Coast Time, or UTC-5, I think it is. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 noon that time. This Wednesday, I'll be starting The Edge of Running Water by William Sloane, the second of two tales of cosmic horror contained within The Rim of Morning The Rim of Morning collection, which has those two collected. On Friday, we will continue reading The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. Shout out again, thank you to Jim Burke for giving me a heads up that there was something amiss with my microphone. I'm glad I have fixed that so that it is working better for all and sundry.
the gain was cranked way up. Normally I have it cranked down a bit, so to keep it from doing scrackly badness, which apparently it's been doing, and I don't know for how long. I'm not going to re-record whatever I've done with it since whatever the last... It was probably whenever I updated the program last. It probably reset some of the settings. Oops. Anyway, until next time, I've got a scooch, but we will be reading on Wednesday and Friday. So far, my schedule is going to remain the same, but towards the end of the year, things are going to get dicey. I don't know when exactly yet. People will be the first to know. Anyway, with that, I'm going to leave you all. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. I'll see you all next time. Toodaloo!